For the past several lectures, we've been talking about the control panel that directs our cognitive machinery, that guides it towards one goal or another. Or to put it another way, we've been talking primarily about human motivation. And when it comes to understanding what motivates people, perhaps the most fundamental distinction that can be made is whether any particular decision is motivated by approach or by avoidance. Freud articulated this wisdom with his so-called pleasure principle, the idea that people tend to seek pleasure and avoid pain. But Freud was hardly the first person to make this observation. The idea can be traced back at least as far as the ancient Greeks. Philosophers running from Plato to Epicurus down to Jeremy Bentham have made similar points, that people can be motivated both by seeking rewards and by avoiding punishment. Even Janet Jackson, that modern-day lyric philosopher, had a 1986 hit called The Pleasure Principle, which as far as I know is just a straightforward encapsulation of Freud's thinking on approach and avoidance. I don't know for sure, I haven't looked it up, but I'm pretty sure that's right. So, the idea that people approach rewards and avoid punishments is pretty basic. And it serves as one of the foundational insights that underlie entire schools of psychological thought, from decision-making to motivated reasoning to habit formation to animal learning. Both of these tendencies, approach and avoidance, are motivational states, and they can both affect our decision-making in different ways. And for a long time, that was assumed to be more or less the major story in motivation research. There were, of course, lots of interesting specific details that were important to chase down, but the major structure of goal-derived decision-making fit into these two categories. Was the decision motivated by approaching some positive outcome, or was it avoiding some negative outcome? Because those two options more or less covered everything. This state of the field existed for decades, until the late 1990s. When a psychologist at Columbia University named Torrey Higgins proposed a slight modification. He didn't attempt to overturn the pleasure principle, or as it's sometimes called, the hedonic principle. Rather, he suggested we could better understand it by introducing another motivational factor that cuts across approach and avoidance. The result was a motivational theory called regulatory focus, or more properly, self-regulatory focus. This is another of the many examples in this course where a psychologist labeled something in about as least intuitive a way as possible. Self-regulation is the fancy psychology term for self-control, or in other words, directing yourself towards some end. So regulatory focus is really a theory about the way that you motivate yourself. To understand the distinctions that Higgins made in this theory, it's useful to consider a specific example to make it more concrete. So let's think about the various motivations a person might have for wanting to work hard at their job. Note that we're not talking about different levels of motivation. Everyone we're going to talk about is equally motivated to work hard here, no slackers. But as we'll see, the reasons why they work hard can be very different. Let me suggest 4 possible motivations, and you see if you can think of anyone that you have worked with who might fit into each of these categories. Some people are motivated by the potential for gain. They work hard in their job because they want promotions and raises to get ahead. And so they hope that their hard work will be acknowledged and lead to bigger and better things. Others work hard in order to avoid getting fired. They don't want to lose what they currently have. So far, so Freudian. People want to approach gains, like getting a promotion, and avoid losses, like getting fired. But Higgins identified 2 other, more subtle types of a motivation. He identified another approach motivation and another avoidance motivation. Let's look at approach first. In addition to working hard in order to gain something more, like a promotion, some people are motivated to work hard because they want to obtain job security. They want to lock in that favorable situation that they find themselves in. Now, did you get that distinction? It's pretty subtle. Both seeking a promotion and seeking job security are approach motivational states. They're both actively working towards something, but one group is approaching a gain. They want to get ahead. And the other group is approaching a non-loss. They want stability and security. So we've just divided that general approach motivation into two separate categories based on what is being approached. We can approach gains, but we can also approach non-losses. And the same thing can be done for avoidance goals. Some people work hard because they want to avoid getting fired. They want to avoid losses. But others want to avoid non-gains. They work hard because they want to avoid getting stuck in their current job. They don't want to miss out on future opportunities. They don't want to get left behind. Now, those distinctions may seem subtle, and admittedly, they are. But as I'll show you in the rest of this lecture, those subtle distinctions can matter. They can change the decisions that people make. Ultimately, these different motivations can change the control panel settings that guide our cognitive machinery and lead us to make different decisions. So that is the key insight that underlies regulatory focus theory. That instead of just two main drives, approach and avoid, there are actually four main motivational states. You can envision these as laid out on a grid. Picture a vertical line intersected in the middle by a horizontal line, just like the Cartesian coordinate plane you used to graph functions in Algebra 2. The top half of the vertical line indicates approach motivation, and the bottom half indicates avoidance motivation. In other words, the vertical line represents the same basic motivations that philosophers and psychologists have been talking about for centuries. Bisecting this axis in the horizontal line maps Higgins' regulatory focus orientations. On the left side of the horizontal axis, we have a promotion orientation. On the right side, we have a prevention orientation. Now, the four quadrants formed by intersecting these lines are the four goal states that we just talked about. So in the upper left-hand quadrant, where someone with an approach motivation also has a promotion orientation, we have someone seeking a gain. These people tend to be motivated by securing advancement and happiness. When an approach motivation is paired with a prevention orientation, we have someone who is seeking non-losses as the desired state. These people tend to be seeking security and calmness. That's in the upper right-hand quadrant. The bottom two quadrants are the avoidance motivations. When avoidance is paired with a promotion orientation, we have people seeking an end state of avoiding non-gains. People in this motivational state want to avoid ending up sad or unfulfilled. That's on the bottom left. And finally, in the bottom right quadrant, we have an avoidance motivation paired with a prevention orientation. People in this state want to avoid losses. They're seeking to mitigate threats and reduce anxiety. Research shows that people tend to naturally favor one of these two regulatory focus orientations. Psychologists refer to this tendency to favor one orientation as your chronic regulatory focus. So you, as an individual, will tend to be more inclined towards promotion, where you are primarily concerned with approaching gains and avoiding non-gains, or you will tend toward a prevention orientation, where you are primarily concerned with avoiding losses and approaching non-losses. Your chronic regulatory focus orientation is a function of many things. One of them is your culture. Research suggests that people raised in similar cultures tend to have a similar chronic regulatory focus. Research also suggests that your chronic regulatory focus is likely related to the techniques that your parents used when they raised you. Some parents use what researchers have characterized as a nurturance-oriented parenting style. They show lots of affection and appreciation, including physical affection, laughter, and expressions of gratitude, in order to reinforce positive behavior. And they withdraw affection and trust in response to negative behaviors. These parents tend to raise children with a chronic promotion orientation. In contrast, Other parents use what researchers have called a security-oriented parenting style. These parents tend to be stern or strict. They meet negative behaviors with scolding or reproach, and they reinforce positive behaviors by acceptance, by a cessation of nagging or bothering or correcting. These parents tend to raise children with a chronic prevention focus. Now might be a good time to emphasize a couple of things about these different types of regulatory focus. First, it is emphatically not the case that one type of focus is better than another. As I mentioned in the example about the different motivational states that could lead a person to work hard at his or her job, people can be motivated by all kinds of things and still end up working just as hard. So it's not the case that a promotion focus motivates people better than a prevention focus, or that we should all try to be in a prevention mindset because that will be more effective than a promotion state. Not true. These are just different ways that people have of thinking about their goals and motivations. The other thing to realize about regulatory focus is that even though we all tend to have a chronic preference for one of these states over the other, regulatory focus is in fact relatively fluid. In other words, our natural preference for promotion or prevention, or vice versa, is not a strong and enduring trait like handedness. In fact, research has shown it is extremely easy to shift people from one regulatory focus to another. The evidence suggests that we all likely hopscotch around all four quadrants in that matrix that I introduced. We may be more comfortable in general on one half of the grid, either on the promotion side or the prevention side, but we can shift back and forth fairly easily, depending on the particular decision and the setting we're in. In other words, relatively subtle cues in our environment can make us start thinking in a promotion or a prevention way, at least for a while, even if we are naturally inclined towards a different orientation. For example, you might be naturally a prevention-focused person, and so be most comfortable making decisions that are consistent with approaching non-losses and avoiding losses. But when some environmental trigger encourages you to think with a promotion orientation, say your boss has just told you about a new management slot opening up that she thinks you'd be perfect for, and she encourages you to consider applying for the advancement. Well, after that shift, we might expect you to start making decisions that are more likely to reflect a promotion orientation, approaching gains and avoiding non-gains. What I've described to you so far is, I hope, an interesting story about motivations. It comes with a nice, somewhat provocative taxonomy of motivational states, and from a theory development perspective, it adds something new over what we already knew about motivation. But none of that explains why regulatory focus became so popular among psychologists. And it did. For a few years in the early 2000s, it felt like regulatory focus was absolutely everywhere in psychology research. I was getting my PhD during those years, and I had 3 separate seminars that spent significant portions of the semester talking about how regulatory focus theory contributed to some particular field of study or another. It has influenced research on communication, persuasion, memory, decision-making, public policy, cultural psychology, and marketing. At one point, a friend of mine told me that he was at a research conference and he saw a presentation on the program with a title that was something like 22 more things that regulatory focus can influence. He told me he skipped that session. In short, the reason that regulatory focus became so popular among researchers is that it was so consistently able to predict behavior. And the predictive power came from a very simple idea. If we have a particular preference for thinking about gains and non-gains, as we do with a promotion focus, or about losses and non-losses, as we do with a prevention focus, then that will affect our decisions. We will like things more when they are consistent with our regulatory focus. This is known as regulatory fit. And regulatory fit just kind of feels right. If you are in a prevention mindset and you see an ad promoting something in terms of avoiding losses, you like that better than an equivalent ad that spoke in terms of approaching gains. Regulatory fit leads to arguments being more persuasive. When there is a regulatory misfit, then we don't like that. We'll find those arguments less persuasive, less attractive. For example, imagine two things that might happen to you. Scenario 1. When booking a flight to visit family, because of when you end up purchasing your ticket, you need to spend an extra $50 over what the flight usually costs. Scenario 2. You had the opportunity to save $50 on a ticket, say a special voucher. But because of when you booked your ticket, you missed the chance to use it, and so were unable to take advantage of that special offer. Does one of those two scenarios feel worse to you than the other? In both cases, you were out $50 relative to what you thought you were going to have to spend. But in one of those cases, the $50 came in the form of a loss, paying more than expected. The other is a non-gain, failing to take advantage of potential savings. And for many people, the feelings elicited by those two types of pain are not equivalent, even if they involve the same amount of money. Tori Higgins and two other researchers conducted a study using scenarios very similar to the ones I just described. And they found that people with a chronic promotion orientation were more sensitive to the scenarios about non-gains. Missing out on a deal seemed especially painful to them. But the opposite was true for people with chronic prevention orientations. They were more sensitive to scenarios involving losses, paying more than expected. The explanation given for the finding was regulatory fit. If I have a promotion orientation, I tend to be more sensitive to, and therefore react more strongly to, gains and non-gains. It's like my mind is more prepared to process that type of information. And so my reactions will be more finely attuned. And so in the case of aversive stimuli, a person with a promotion orientation will find non-gains even more aversive than losses. Regulatory fit is a powerful idea that can help explain a lot of decision-making. It's especially useful when trying to tease apart why certain appeals or attributes or options seem to appeal so well to certain people, but can fall so flat with others. To understand this, let's focus on three of the major implications of regulatory fit theory: goal pursuit, persuasion, and decision-making. First, regulatory fit has been used to explain the means by which people strive to achieve their goals. When pursuing their goals, people may use any number of specific strategies or actions. For example, if you want to lose weight, you could actively seek out foods with certain nutritional characteristics. Choose more high-protein, low-carb foods, for example. Or you could seek to avoid certain foods, say eliminate sweets. Regulatory fit theory predicts the strategies that people will employ in goal pursuit will be consistent with or fit with their regulatory focus. Are you a promotion person? Then it's likely that eager strategies will resonate with you. You'll be looking for ways to make changes and act now. You'll be focused on the ideal outcome and be motivated by thoughts of success. On the other hand, if you are a prevention kind of person, then vigilant strategies will be more likely to appeal to you. You'll want to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks or gets overlooked. A prevention-focused individual seeks to fulfill duties and obligations. You'll be motivated by thoughts of what will happen if you fail to meet your goal, and so try to make sure that doesn't happen. When people pursue goals using strategies that conflict with their regulatory focus, they experience misfit and are generally less successful in achieving their goals. This insight extends even to receiving feedback on how well the goal pursuit is going. A promotion orientation tends to be associated with high energy emotions and with eagerness. As a result, when pursuing a promotion-oriented goal, positive feedback tends to increase the motivation to pursue the goal. Perceived success drives even more effort. In contrast, a prevention tends to be associated with low energy emotional states, like relaxation and calmness. This means that paradoxically, receiving positive feedback on prevention-oriented goals can actually be demotivating. The psychologist Jens Forster and colleagues tested this prediction by having people play a game that was framed in one of two different ways. One version of the game was framed to foster a promotion goal. Specifically, players were told that they would gain points by solving problems. The other version was framed in reference to a prevention goal. Players were told that successful puzzles would cause them to not lose points. When, halfway through the game, participants were given positive feedback, told that they were doing well, those playing the promotion-oriented game worked even harder, showing higher levels of persistence and better performance. In contrast, those playing the prevention game were actually demotivated by positive feedback, performing worse on the second half of the game. That gives us an idea as to how regulatory fit can affect goal pursuit. Regulatory fit has also been found to affect persuasion. People in a promotion frame of mind tend to find gain-focused appeals more persuasive, while those with a prevention orientation seem to resonate with arguments about avoiding losses and obtaining non-losses. Angela Lee from Northwestern University and Jennifer Acker from Stanford tested this proposition. They presented experimental participants with two alternative versions of an ad for Welch's grape juice. The text of one ad emphasized that grape juice can be great for creating energy. It's delicious and fun to drink, a very gain-focused message. Others were given a similar ad, but this one focused on the health benefits of grape juice. High in antioxidants to reduce the risk of cancer and heart disease, and flavonoids to help blood flow freely. Essentially, the ad focused on ways grape juice could help someone avoid negative health outcomes, avoid losses. And sure enough, they found that after viewing the fun and delicious gain-focused ad, people with a promotion orientation liked Welch's grape juice more. In contrast, the loss-focused ad that emphasized health benefits led to prevention-oriented people liking Welch's more. The ads were more persuasive when the message fit with the person's regulatory focus. But the ads fell flat when there was low fit, when promotion-oriented people read about disease prevention benefits, or when prevention-oriented people read about promoting energy. The importance of regulatory fit in anticipating persuasive messages has also been tested in the context of public health messaging. Guangji Zhao and Connie Peckman developed several versions of a 30-second anti-smoking public service announcement. All of the ads showed a group of college-age students hanging out in a group when one of the students lights up a cigarette. His peers respond disapprovingly. That much was held constant across the ads. But one version had a promotion-focused message. In this variant, when all of the smoker's friends stop talking to stare at him after lighting up, he puts out the cigarette. His friends then smile and laugh approvingly, and the smoker appears happy with his decision. The ad ends with the tagline, "Don't smoke, have a good time." Another version of the ad was a prevention-focused ad. In this ad, after the smoker lights a cigarette, everyone looks bothered and aggravated as they stare on in silence. The smoker looks suddenly nervous. The concluding tagline reads, "Don't smoke, smoking is annoying." These ads and others were tested on ninth graders. The researchers ran two versions of the study. In one case, chronic regulatory focus was measured, so they could find out who was naturally promotion-focused and who was naturally prevention-focused. In the second study, regulatory focus was activated using an essay writing task. In both studies, whether regulatory focus was measured or manipulated, the results were the same. When there was a high degree of regulatory fit, the ad was seen as more persuasive. In other words, prevention-focused teenagers found the loss-focused ad more persuasive. That's the one that encouraged them to avoid incurring social disapproval by not being annoying. The promotion-focused teens, on the other hand, were more persuaded by the gain-focused ad, the one that encouraged attaining social approval by not smoking. In fact, research suggests that regulatory fit has the potential to influence decision-making at several points in the decision-making process, including the way information is acquired and how that information is weighted in decision-making. In short, there's evidence that people construct preferences that are consistent with their regulatory focus. Imagine you were evaluating some new toothpaste from brands you'd never heard of. Each toothpaste is described by several different attributes: breath freshening, plaque control, that kind of thing. A lot of research in decision-making suggests that you likely don't have strong preformed preferences about which of these attributes is more important. And instead, you might form your preferences in the moment, based on the information that is available to you right then. This is known in decision-making circles as constructed preferences. And a regulatory fit perspective on constructed preferences predicts that you will construct your preferences so as to be consistent with your regulatory focus. Researchers Jing Wang and Angela Lee tested this prediction by first inducing a group of people to have either a promotion orientation or a prevention orientation. Then they had them evaluate those toothpastes. They described various toothpastes using a combination of 6 different attributes. 3 of the attributes were promotion-focused: breath freshening, teeth whitening, and enamel strengthening were all about what could be gained from using the product. 3 of the attributes were prevention-focused: cavity prevention, gingivitis prevention, and plaque control described what could be prevented by using the product. And sure enough, people with a promotion orientation chose the toothpastes that excelled on the promotion attributes, and prevention-oriented people chose the toothpastes that were better on prevention attributes. Finally, regulatory fit can even influence the type of decision we are inclined to make. Often, the decisions that we make are not based on certain outcomes, but are actually based on probability estimates. You don't know for sure whether going to a bar with friends will produce an optimal level of enjoyment for the evening. It might be miserable. Maybe you'd enjoy a quiet evening at home more. But you won't know for sure how entertaining the bar will be until after you decide. Instead, you make an estimate, and you make your best guess. In choices like these, where we're not exactly sure of the outcomes, but have to make some estimates, some decision researchers have borrowed terminology from signal detection theory. According to this framework, there are 4 possible outcomes for a decision like this. You can score a hit. That would be a correct decision. You thought that going out drinking with friends would be the best option, and you were right. You went and you had a great time. Or you could commit an error of omission. This is where you didn't take advantage of an opportunity when it was presented to you. Some friends invited you to go out with them, you passed on the chance, and you later found out that everyone had a great time, and you missed it. Or you could have a correct rejection. The offer to go to the bar was extended, and you politely declined. And when you heard the stories the next morning, it was clear that you made the correct decision. The bar was terrible. Someone got food poisoning from an undercooked appetizer. Someone else got into a fight. Just a terrible night all around, and you correctly opted to miss it. And finally, you could have an error of commission. You decided to go to the bar, and it was miserable. You made the wrong choice. You may have already realized that these 4 decision outcomes map pretty cleanly onto the 4 quadrants of the approach avoidance matrix we talked about earlier. Higgins and his colleagues noticed this too, and so they predicted that when people had a promotion orientation, the regulatory fit hypothesis predicts that they should favor decision strategies that are consistent with eager, gain-focused approaches. In other words, promotion-oriented individuals should be primarily focused on maximizing hits and avoiding errors of omission. They don't want to miss out on anything with the potential of being good. They're willing to take any opportunities presented. Prevention-oriented people, in contrast, are primarily focused on vigilant, loss-focused strategies. They want to maximize correct rejections and minimize errors of commission. They'd rather miss out on a few fun nights rather than risk committing to an evening that turns out to be a flop. The end result is that regulatory fit can affect